Okay, let's give this another try. Okay, let's put this here. Right. Chapter 1, The Black Man and Language. We attach a fundamental importance to the phenomenon of language and consequently consider the study of language essential for providing us with one element in understanding the black man's dimension for being for others. It being understood that to speak is to exist absolutely for the other. The black man possesses two dimensions, one with his fellow blacks, the other with the whites. A black man behaves differently with a white man than he does with another black man. There is no doubt whatsoever that this vociferousness is a direct consequence of colonial undertaking. Vociferousness and the adjective vociferous derives from the 19th century New Latin vociferus, combining Latin physis split, cleft, from findere to split, and perus, producing, bearing, from parere to give birth. Initially referred to the organisms that reproduce by dividing into new individuals, but the late 19th century was adapted to mean a tendency to break into parts, fragment, or diverge. Vociferous tendencies in a political group. So there is no doubt whatsoever that this vociferousness is a direct consequence of the colonial undertaking. It's the same thing about needing to code switch or having these smaller divisions of oneself of what is acceptable and what is not. And so this way that people would say the, in the ways that we describe it these days to mask or to have neurodiversity and so on. But here for Fanon, it's much more radical than that. Nobody dreams of challenging the fact that its principal inspiration is nurtured by the core of theories which represent the black man as the missing link in the slow evolution from ape to man. They are objectives, facts that state reality. Okay, still recording. But once we have taken note of the situation, once we have understood it, we consider the job done. How can we possibly not hear that voice again tumbling down the steps of history? Quote, it's no longer a question of knowing the world, but of transforming it, end quote. This question is terribly present in their lives. To speak means being able to use a certain syntax and possessing the morphology of such and such a language. But it means, above all, assuming a culture and bearing the weight of civilization. Morphology. Morphology. Greek morphe, form, shape. The study of form or structure, especially word formation, morphemes, or organismal structure. Since the situation is not one-sided, the study should reflect this. We would very much like to be given credit for certain points that, however unacceptable they may appear early on, will prove to be factually accurate. The problem we shall tackle in this chapter is as follows. The more the black Antillean assimilates the French language, the whiter he gets, i.e., the closer he comes to becoming a true human being. We are fully aware that this is one man's attitude faced with being. A man who possesses a language possesses an indirect consequence, the world expressed and implied by this language. You can see what we're driving at. There is an extraordinary power in the possession of a language. Paul Valéry knew this and described language as, quote, the God gone astray in the flesh. Paul Valéry, French poet and essayist, 1871 to 1945. In a work in progress, Language and aggressiveness. Hmm. Language and aggressiveness. We propose to study this phenomenon. For the time being, we would like to demonstrate why the Black Antillian, whoever he is, always has to justify his stance in relation to language. Going one step further, we shall enlarge the scope of our description to include every colonized subject. All colonized people, in other words, people in whom an inferiority complex has taken root, whose local cultural originality has been committed to the grave, position themselves in relation to the civilizing language, i.e., the metropolitan culture. The more the colonized has assimilated the cultural values of the metropolis, the more he will have escaped the bush. The more he has rejects, the more he rejects his blackness and the bush, the whiter he will become. In the colonial army, and particularly in the regiments of Senegalese soldiers, the quote, native officers are mainly interpreters. They serve to convey to their fellow soldiers the master's orders, and they themselves enjoy a certain status. There is a town, there is the country, there is the capital, there are the provinces. Apparently, the problem is the same. Take an inhabitant of Lyon in Paris. He will boast of how calm his city is, how bewitchingly beautiful are the banks of the Rhone, how magnificent are the plane trees, and so many other things that people with nothing to do like to go on about. If you meet him on his return from Paris, and especially if you've never been to the capital, he'll never stop singing its praises. Paris, city of light, the Seine, the riverside dance cafes. See Paris and die. The same process repeats itself in the case of the Martinician. First, there is his island, Basse-Pointe, Marigot, Gosmont, in opposition to the imposing city of Fort-de-France. Then, and this is the essential point, there is what lies beyond his island. Let's have a look at these places. Martinique, Marigot. Wow. See, then my first thought was like, oh, it looks like Norway. The references, the Nordic supremacy. Oh, that's up there. It's interesting. Fort de France. Then, and this is the essential point, there is what lies beyond his island. The black man who has been to the metropole is a demigod. On this subject, I shall indicate a fact that I must have struck my fellow islanders. After a fairly long stay in the metropole, many Antilleans return home to be deified. The native islander who has never left his hole, the country bumpkin, adopts a most eloquent form of ambivalence toward them. The black man who has lived in France for a certain time returns home radically transformed. Genetically speaking, his phenotype undergoes an absolute definitive mutation. By this, we mean that the black man who returns home gives the impression of having completed the cycle, of having added something that was missing. He returns home literally full of himself. Even before he leaves, one sense from his almost aerial way of walking that new forces have been set in motion. When he meets a friend or a colleague, gone is the expensive bear hug. Instead, our future candidate bows discreetly. The usually raucous voice gives away his hushed murmur. Making constitute a disturbingly harsh and loud noise. The usually raucous voice gives way to a hushed murmur, for he knows that over there in France he will be stuck with a stereotype in La Havre or Marseille. Quote, I'm from Martinique. This is my fewy first visit to France. He knows that what the poets called divine cooing, meaning Creole, is but a term midway between Creole and French. In the French Antilles, the bourgeoisie does not use Creole, except when speaking to servants. See, and there's the equivalent of that also, let's say in Taiwan or other places. Creole refers to people, cultures, and language that originate from the blending of European, primarily French, Spanish, or Portuguese, African, and indigenous traditions, particularly in colonial contexts like the Caribbean, Louisiana, and parts of Africa, Asia. It describes individuals of mixed race descents. Historically, European descendants born in the colonies. Creole language is a stable native language that developed from a pidgin. Pidgin and Creole. Pidgin is grammatically simplified, non-native second language that develops a lingua franca for communication between groups lacking of a common tongue, typically for trade or during colonization. It features reduced vocabulary and mixed grammar. For evolving to a Creole, it must become a community's first language. And so I suppose for myself in Australia, here with the immigrant community, we don't just speak Taiwanese or Taiyu or Minanyu or it's even reduced format taken away from that, and we're then creating our own pidgin and Creole amongst ourselves. Is a term midway between Creole and French. In the French Antilles, the bourgeoisie does not use Creole except when speaking to servants. At school, the young Martinician is taught to treat the dialect with contempt. Avoid Creolisms. And this, I've been thinking a lot about contempt and self-contempt versus self-hate. Contempt, the feeling of a person of being worthless or beneath consideration. And I think that's the relational difference. Hatred was self-hatred versus contempt. Self-hatred or self-loathing is an intense, generalized, and often enduring sense of worthlessness, while self-contempt is a more specific, cold, and dismissive rejection of oneself, often acting as secondary, highly destructive emotion. It's like self-effacement. Effacement is a thinning, shortening, softening of the cervix. Self-effacement, the quality of not claiming attention for oneself, and how that shows up on the daily. The black man entering France. Hold on. Where were we? Some families forbid speaking Creole at home, and mothers call their children like ragamuffins for using it. This is like a lot of immigrants that refuse to speak their own language in their new settlement. Could be Italians or a lot of times happen to the Japanese or the Chinese because of self-hatred or because of the colonial white supremacy. My mother wanted a memorandum son. Memorandum. A written message in business or diplomacy. My mother wanted a memorandum son. Well, ain't that common now, model minority-wise. My mother wanted a memorandum son. If you don't learn your history lesson, you will not go to Sunday Mass. In your Sunday best, this child will be the shame of us. This child will be our God, damn it. Shut up, I told you, you have to speak French. The French from France. The Frenchman's French. French. Yes, I must watch my diction because that's how they'll judge me. He can't even speak French properly. They'll say that with the utmost contempt. And that's the thing with contempt, and to place someone else underneath you, and that's the envy of whites, the white envy. And so notice that when a racialized person speaks below them, then they'll smile with eagerness. Oh, how this person doesn't speak properly. However, if you speak properly, then they'll look down on you as well. The envy will leak. Among a group of young Antillians, He who can express himself, who masters the language, is the one to look out for. Be wary of him. He's almost white. In France, they say to speak like a book. In Martinique, they say to speak like a white man. The black man entering France reacts against the myth of the Martinician who swallows his R's. He'll go to work on it and enter into open conflict with it. He will make every effort not only to roll his R's, but also to make them stand out, on the lookout for the slightest reaction of others, listening to himself speak and not trusting his own tongue. An unfortunately lazy organ, he will lock himself into his room and read for hours, desperately working on his diction. There's much difference here. Recently, a friend told us this story. On arrival in Le Havre, a Martinician goes into a cafe and calls out with great assurance, "Waiter, bring me a drink of beer." This is a case of genuine intoxication. Anxious not to correspond to the black man who swallowed his R's, he makes use of a great many of them but doesn't know how to divide them out. There is a psychological phenomenon that consists in believing the world will open up as borders are broken down. The black Antillean prisoner on his island, lost in an atmosphere without the slightest prospect, feels the core of Europe like a breath of fresh air. For we must admit that Césaire was overly generous in his notebook of a return to my native land. The city of Fort-de-France is truly lackluster and shipwrecked. Over there, on the slopes of the sun, is, quote, the city, flat, sprawled, tripped up by its common sense, inert, winded under the geometric weight of its eternally renewed cross at odds with its fate, mute, baffled, unable to circulate the pith of this ground, embarrassed, lopped, reduced, cut off from fauna and flora. Césaire's description has nothing poetical about it. It is easy to understand, therefore, why the black man, on the announcement of his entry into France, as is said of someone entering high society, is overjoyed and decides to change. Moreover, there is nothing thematic about this change that is structural and independent of an introspection. In the United States, Pierce and Williamson have conducted an experiment called the Peckham experiment. The authors have proved that there is a biochemical modification in a married couple, and apparently they have detected in the husband certain hormones of his pregnant wife. It would have interest. It would be interesting, and there will always be someone willing to make a study of the black man's humoral mutation on entering France. Humoral mutation. Humoral relating to the body fluids, especially with regards to immune responses involving antibodies in body fluids as distinct from cells. Certain hormones of his pregnant. It would be interesting. There will always be someone willing to make a study of the black man's humoral mutation on entering France. Wow. Or simply study his psyche before he leaves and then 1 month after settling in France. There is a dramatic conflict in what is commonly called the human sciences. Should we postulate a typical human reality and describe its psychic modalities? Postulate. To suggest or assume existence, truth of something as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or belief. That's the thing about people postulate versus hypothesis. So often people get into conversation and we're not postulating or hypothesizing anything. We're just reinforcing university discourse or the ideology or the superegoic mutual control and so forth. It's very rare that people actually come. To postulate is an assumption accepted as true without proof to serve a foundation of reasoning or theory. Hypothesis, on the other hand, is a proposed testable explanation for an observation meant to be proven or disproven through experimentation. Postulates are starting points. Hypotheses are testable predictions. And so, not even knowing the difference, what are we actually talking about a lot of times? in a discussion. It's just repetition. And what happens when that symbolic order, what happens when that structure is no longer worthy or worthy of contempt, such as white supremacy? So let's continue. It would be interesting, and there will always be someone willing to make a study of the black man's humoral mutation on entering France, or simply study his psyche before he leaves and then 1 month after settling in France. There is a dramatic conflict in what is commonly called the human sciences. Should we postulate a typical human reality and describe its psychic modalities, taking into account only the imperfections, or should we not rather make a constant, solid endeavor to understand man in an ever changing light? When we read that a man loses his affective faculties starting at the age of 29 and he has to wait until he is 49 to regain them, we feel the ground give way beneath our feet. Our only hope of getting out of the situation is to pose the problem correctly. For all these findings and all the research have a single aim: to get man to admit he is nothing, absolutely nothing, and get him to eradicate this narcissism whereby he thinks he is different from the other animals. There is nothing more or less than the capitulation of man. Love that word, capitulation. Capitulation is the act of surrendering, yielding, or ceasing resistance to an opponent or demand, often after long struggle. The long struggle is somehow encapsulated within our word. Capitulation derives from the medieval Latin capitulare, to treat upon terms, to draw up in heads in chapters, originating from Latin capitulum, little head or chapter, diminutive of a caput. It originally referred to arranging surrender terms in chapters, evolving from 16th century negotiation to 17th century surrender. The refusal of capitulation as a contrast. There is nothing more or less than the capitulation of man. All in all, I grasp my narcissism with both hands and I reject the vileness of those who want to turn man into a machine. If the debate cannot be opened up on a philosophical level, the fundamental demands of human reality, I agree to place it on a psychoanalytical level. In other words, the misfires, just as we talk about an engine misfiring. The black man entering France changes because for him the metropole is the holy of holies. He changes not only because that where his knowledge of Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire comes from, but also because that's where his doctors, his departmental superiors, and innumerable little potentates refers to a powerful ruler or monarch. Potentates comes from the staff sergeant, 15 years on the job, to the gendarme, men of arms, from Panisieres, Panisier, Baker, so all these people of position. There's a kind of spell cast from afar, and the black man who leaves in 1 week for the metropole creates an aura of magic around him, where the words Paris, Marseille, the Sorbonne, and Pigalle represent the high points. Where's Pigalle? We talked about last time, Moulin Rouge. On departure, the amputation of his being vanishes as the ocean liner comes into view. He can read the authority and mutation he has acquired in the eyes of those accompanying him to the ship. Adieu, Madras. Adieu, Foulard. Scarf. Mm. Now that we have accompanied him to the port, let him sail away and we'll come back to him later on. Let us now go and meet one of those who have returned home. The new returnee, as soon as he sets foot on the island, asserts himself. He answers only in French, and often no longer understands Creole. A folk tale provides us with an illustration of this. After having spent several months in France, a young farmer returns home. On seeing a plough, he asks his father, an old, "Don't pull that kind of thing on me, peasant." "What's that thing called?" By way of an answer, his father drops the plough on his foot, and his amnesia vanishes. Awesome therapy. So here is our new returnee. He can no longer understand Creole. He talks of the opera house, which he has probably seen only from a distance. But most of all, he assumes a critical attitude towards his fellow islanders. He reacts differently at the slightest pretext. He knows everything. He proves himself through his language on the savannah in Fort de France, meeting place for young people. The new returnee is given the floor for a purpose. As soon as school's out, they all gather on the savannah. Imagine a square 600 feet long and 120 feet wide, linen lined by worm eaten tamarind trees down each side. At the top, the huge war memorial acknowledging the mother's country's gratitude to her children, and the bottom, the central hotel, a square twisted with an uneven paving stone and gravel that crunches underfoot, and walking up and down in it 300 or 400 people greeting one another, making contact. No, never making contact, and walking on. "Hi, how's it going? Hi, how's it going? Hi, how's it going?" And that's been going on for 50 years. Yes, this town is a lamentable shipwreck. This life, too. They meet and talk, and the new returnee is quickly given the floor because they are waiting for him. First of all, regarding form, the slightest mistake is seized upon, scrutinized, and in less than 48 hours it will be all over Fort de France. There is no forgiving the Martinician, flaunting his superiority for failing his duty. Let him say, for instance, "I did not have the good fortune, when in France, of seeing gendarmes on horses' backs," and he is lost. His only choice is either to get rid of his Parisian affection or to die of ridicule. For people will never forget, once married, his wife will realize she has married a joke, and his children will have to deal with and live down the tale. Where does this change of personality come from? What can this new way of being be ascribed to? Any idiom is a way of thinking. Desmaret and Pichon said, and the fact that the newly returned Martinician adopts a language different from the community in which he was born is evidence of a shift and a split. Professor Westermann writes in The African Today that the feeling of inferiority of by blacks is especially evident in the educated black man who is constantly trying to overcome it. The method used, Westermann adds, is often naive. Quote, "The wearing of European clothes, whether rags or the most up to date style, using European furniture and European forms of social intercourse, adorning the native language with European expressions, using bombastic phrases in speaking or writing a European language, all these contribute to a feeling of equality with the European and his achievements. By referring to other research and our personal observations, we would like to try to show why the black man posits himself in such characteristic way to regard to European languages. We recall once again that our findings are valid for the French Antilles. We are all aware, however, that the same behavior can be found in any race subjected to colonization. We have known and unfortunately still know comrades from Dahomey or the Congo who says that they are Antillean. We have known and still known Antilleans who get annoyed at being taken for Senegalese. It's because Antillean is more evolved than the African, meaning he is closer to the white man. And this difference exists only on the street or along the boulevard, but also in the admiration and the army. Any Antillean who has done military service in a colonial regiment of infantry is familiar with this distressing situation. On one side, the Europeans and the French Antilleans, and the other, the Africans. I can remember when in the heat of action, a nest of enemy machine guns had to be wiped out. 3 times the Senegalese were ordered out, and 3 times they were forced back. Then one of the Senegalese asked why the Tubabs didn't go. Tubabs is a Wolof term commonly used in West African countries like Senegal to refer to people of European descent or white foreigners. In such moments, we no longer knew whether we were the Tulabs or the natives. For many Antilleans, however, the situation was by no means distressing, but on the contrary, quite normal. That would be the last straw, and to put us with the N word. The European despises the African, and the Antillean lords, it is uncontested master over this black rabble. An extreme example, but nevertheless amusing, is the following. I was recently talking with a Martinician who was incensed by the certain Guadeloupans who were passing for Martinicians. But he added that the mistake was rapidly detected. They were more savage than we are, meaning once again they are farther removed from the white man. It is said that be, the black man likes to palaver, unnecessarily elaborate or complex procedure. It is said that the black man likes to palaver, and whenever I pronounce the word palaver, I see a group of boisterous children raucously and blandly calling out to the world. Children at play, insofar as playing can be seen as an initiation of life. The black man likes to palaver, and it is only a short step to a new theory that the black man is just like a child. Psychoanalysts have a field day, and the word orality is soon pronounced. But we have to look further. We cannot hope to cover the fundamental question of language here in its entirety. The remarkable research by Piaget has taught us to distinguish stages in its emergence, and the studies by Gelb and Goldstein have demonstrated that the function of language operates by steps and degrees. Here we are interested in the black man confronted by the French language. We would like to understand why the Antillean is so fond of speaking good French. In his introduction to the Anthologie de la Poésie Nègre et Malgache, Jean-Paul Sartre tells us that the black poet will turn against the French language. But this will not be the case for the Antilleans. In this respect, I agree, moreover, with Michael Lyris, who recently wrote on the subject of Creole. Quote, still very much a popular language which everyone can speak more or less, except for the illiterate who speak it exclusively. Creole seems destined sooner or later to become a relic of the past. One's education, however slow its progress, delayed by the too few schools, the shortage of public libraries, and the very low standard of living, is widely accessible to the underprivileged sectors of the population, end quote. And adds the author, quote, for the poet I'm talking about here it's not a question of turning themselves into Antilleans. Along the lines of the picturesque Provençal model, by borrowing a language that, moreover, is devoid of any external influence, whatever might be its intrinsic qualities, but a question of asserting this personal integrity faced with whites who are steeped in the worst racial prejudice and whose arrogance clearly proves to be unfounded. End quote. There may be one Gilbert Gratiant writing in Creole, but admittedly he is a rare case. Besides, the poetic worth of such writing leaves much to be desired. On the other hand, great works have been translated from Wolof and Fulani, and we have been reading Sheikh Anta Diop's linguistic research with great interest. There is nothing comparable in the French Antilles. Let's find out who this guy was. Apologies for the mispronunciation, but Sheikh Anta Diop, Senegalese historian and anthropologist, 1923-1986. This is political study of human races origins. Wow. The African origin of civilization or barbarism, pre-colonial Black Africa, the economic and cultural basis for a federated state. Linguistic research with great interest. There is nothing comparable in the French Antilles. The official language is French. Elementary school teachers keep a close eye on their pupils to make sure that they are not speaking Creole. We will not go into the reasons why. The problem perhaps lies in the fact that in the Antilles, as in Brittany, there's a dialect and there is the French language. But that can't be right because the Bretons do not consider themselves inferior to the French. The Bretons were never civilized by the whites. By refusing to multiply elements, we run the risk of not staying in focus. It is important, however, to tell the black man that the attitude of open rupture has never saved anybody. And although it is true that I must free myself from the strangler because I cannot breathe, nevertheless, it is unhealthy to graft a psychological element, the impossibility of expanding, onto a physiological base, the physical difficulty of breathing. What does that mean? Quite simply this. When an Antillean with a degree in philosophy says he is not sitting for the agrégation because of his color, my response is that philosophy never saved anybody. When another desperately tries to prove to me that the black man is as intelligent as any white man, my response is neither did intelligence save anybody. For if equality among men is proclaimed in the name of intelligence and philosophy, it is also true that these concepts have been used to justify the extermination of man. Before continuing, I believe it necessary to say one or two things. I am speaking here on the hand of alienated, mystified blacks, and on the other of no less alienated, mystifying, and mystified whites. Although only Sartre and Cardinal Verdier have said that the scandal of the black question has gone on far too long, we must conclude that the attitude is right. We too could give multiple references and quotations showing that color prejudice is indeed an idiocy and an iniquity that must be eradicated. How's that different to equality? Inequity. Immoral, grossly unfair. Yeah. Iniquitous, unevenness, unfairness, injustice. Not. Ecus, equal. So iniquity versus inequity or inequality. Inequality means an uneven distribution. Some have more income, while inequity refers to benefit, but this is inequity. Inequality is the gap, but inequity is the unfair system. Okay. Structural violence, structural inequality. So then they have just a word for that. An iniquity that must be eradicated. Sartre begins his Black Orpheus thus, quote, "What would you expect to find when the muzzle that has silenced the voices of black men is removed? That they with thunder you pray? that they would thunder your praise? When these heads that our fathers have forced to the very ground are risen, do you expect to read adoration in their eyes? All I know is that anyone who tries to read in my eyes anything but a perpetual questioning won't see a thing, neither gratitude nor hatred. And if I utter a great shout, it won't be black. No, from the point of the view adopted here, there is no black problem, or at least there is one. The whites are only accidentally interested. How history takes place in obscurity, and the sun I carry with me must lighten every corner. Dr. H.L. Gordon, physician at the Mathari Psychiatric Hospital in Nairobi, writes an article in the East African Medical Journal. Dr. H.L. Gordon. Oh, wow. Gordon from Half Life. Psychiatrist born Bradford, trained in Edinburgh, apparently worked first in Canada, Kenya, 1925. Okay. Quantitatively, he asked, quote, the inferiority amounts to 14.8%. Okay, wow. Dr. H.L. Gordon, physician at the Mathari Psychiatric Hospital in Nairobi, writes in an article in the East African Medical Journal, quote, a highly technical, skilled examination of a series of 1,000 brains of normal natives has found naked eye and microscopic facts indicative of inherent new brain inferiority, end quote. Quantitatively, quote, he adds, the inferiority amounts to 14.8%. There we have it. Some white man quoted by Sir Alan Burns in Colour Prejudice. Lovely. We have said that the black man was the missing link between the ape and man, the white man, of course, and only on page 108 of his book does Sir Alan Burns come to the conclusion, quote, we are unable to accept as scientifically proven the theory that the black man is inherently inferior to the white, or that he comes from a different stock, end quote. Let us add, it would be easy to prove the absurdity of such statements as, quote, the Bible says that the black and white races shall be separated in heaven as they are on earth, and the natives admitted to the kingdom of heaven will find themselves separated to certain of our Father's mansion mentioned in the New Testament, end quote. Or else, quote, we are the chosen people. Look at the color of our skin. Others are black or yellow because of their sins, end quote. Well, I wonder where that's from. The dirty parts of the Bible. Oh God, don't go to the man. Matthew 25:40. By appealing, therefore, to our humanity, to our feelings of dignity, love, and charity, it would be easy to prove and have acknowledged that the black man is equal to the white man. But that is not our purpose. What we are striving for is to liberate the black man from the arsenal of complexes that germinated in a colonial situation. Monsieur Aquil, a teacher at the Lycée du Parc in Lyon, cited a personal experience during his lecture. It is universally familiar experience. Few black people living in France have not experienced it. As a Roman Catholic, he took part in a pilgrimage. Seeing a black man among his flock, the priest asked him, quote, why you left big savannah and why you come with us, end quote. Akil answered most politely, and in this story, it wasn't the young deserter of the savannah Who was the most embarrassed? Everyone laughed at the exchange, and the pilgrimage continued. But if we stop to reflect, we realize that the priest's usage of pidgin calls for several remarks. One, quote, I know black people, you have to talk to them kindly. Talk to them about their country, knowing how to talk to them. That's the key. Now, here's what you have to do, end quote. This is no exaggeration. A white man talking to a person of color behaves exactly like a grown up with a kid, simpering, murmuring, fussing, and cajoling, coddling. It's not just one white person we've observed, but hundreds, and our observations were not limited to one category, insisting of a fundamentally objective attitude. We studied such behavior in physicians, police officers, and foremen on work sites. People would tell us, forgetting our aim, that we could have focused our attention elsewhere and that there are whites who do not fit our description. Our answer to these objections is that here we are picking holes with the mystified, the mystifiers, or the alienated, and that if there are whites who interact sanely with blacks, those are precisely the cases that will not be taken into account. It's not because my patient's liver is functioning normally that his kidneys are healthy. Since his liver is found to be working normally, it is only normal for me to leave it at that and turn my attention to the kidneys. In other words, alongside normal people behavior, relationally according to human psychology, there are those who behave pathologically according to an psychology, inhuman psychology, and it so happens that the existence of such a type of person has determined a number of realities that we would like to help eliminate in this study. Speaking to a black person, speaking to black people in this way is an attempt to reach down to them, to make them feel at ease, to make oneself understood and reassure them. Consulting physicians know this. 20 European patients come and go. Quote, please have a seat. Now, what's the trouble? What can I do for you today? End quote. In comes a black man or an Arab. Quote, sit down, old fellow. Not feeling well? Where's it hurting? When it's not, you not good? 2. To speak gobbledygook to a black man is insulting, for it means he is the gook, yet will be told there is no intention to wilfully give offense. No, but it is precisely this absence of will, this offhand manner, this casualness, and the ease with which they classify him, imprison him at an uncivilized and primitive level, that is insulting. If the person who speaks to a man of color or an Arab in pidgin does not see that there's a flaw or defect in his behavior, then he has never paused to reflect. At a personal level, during certain consultations, I have felt myself lapsing. In the company of this 73-year-old peasant afflicted with senile dementia, I suddenly feel I am losing my touch. The very fact adopting a language suitable for dementia and the mentally retarded, the fact of leaning over. To address this poor 73-year-old woman, the fact of reaching down to her for a diagnosis are the signs of a weakening in my relations with other people. He's an idealist, they'll say. Not at all. It is the others who are the scumbags. I always make a point of speaking to the towel heads in correct French, and I have always been understood. They answer as the best they can, but I refuse to indulge in any form of paternalism. Quote, hey, no feel good? Show me. Belly pain? Heart hurting? End quote. Said in that accent that the hospital interns knows all too well. They have a clear conscience when the answer comes back along the same lines. You see, I told you so. That's how they are. In the opposite case, you need to retract your pseudopodia and behave like a man. The entire foundation collapses. A black man who says, I object, sir, to you calling me my old fellow. Now, there's something new. But we can go even lower. You're sitting in a cafe in Rouen or Strasbourg, and you have the misfortune to be spotted by an old drunk. He makes a beeline for your table. You African, the car. Rufisk, whorehouse, women, coffee, mangoes, bananas. You get up and leave. You're greeted with a hail of insults. Quote, you didn't play big shot like that in your jungle, filthy N-word. Mr. Manoni has described what he calls the Prospero complex. We shall return later to these findings that will allow us to understand the psychology of colonialism. But it is already safe to say that to speak pidgin means you stay where you are. When I meet a German or a Russian speaking bad French, I try to indicate through gestures the information he is asking for. But in doing so, I'm careful not to forget that he has a language of his own, a country, and that perhaps he's a lawyer or an engineer back home. Whatever the case, he is a foreigner with different standards. There is nothing comparable when it comes to the black man. He has no culture, no civilization, and no long historical past. Perhaps that is why today's blacks want desperately to prove to the white world the existence of a black civilization. Whether he likes it or not, the black man has to wear the livery the white man has fabricated for him. Look at children's comic books. All the blacks are mouthing the ritual, yes, boss. In films, the situation is even more acute. Most of the American films dubbed in French reproduce the grinning stereotype, ya bon banania. In one of these recent films, Steel Sharks, there's a black guy on a submarine speaking the most downright classic dialect imaginable. Furthermore, he's a true N-word, walking behind the quartermaster, trembling at the latter's slightest fit of anger, and is killed in the end. I am convinced, however, that in the original version he did not have this way of expressing himself. And even if he did, I can't see why, in a democratic France where 60 million citizens are colored, anyone would dub the same idiocies from America. The reason that the black man has to be portrayed in a certain way, and the same stereotype can be found from the black man in Saint Petit. Me work hard, me never lie, me never steal. To the servant, endure in the sun. Anyone seen that film? Duel in the Sun. 1946 Western romance. All they ask of the black man is to be a good N-word. The rest will follow on its own. Making him speak pidgin is tying him to an image, snaring him, imprisoning him to an internal victim of his own essence, of a visible appearance for which he is not responsible. And of course, just as the Jew who is lavish with his money is suspect, so the black man who quotes Montesquieu must be watched. Let me make myself clear. Watched insofar as he might start something. I do not contend that the black student is suspect to his peers or his professors. But outside university circles, there is an army of fools. It is a question not of educating them, but of teaching the black man not to be a slave of their archetypes. Granted, these fools are the product of psychological economic structure, but that does not get us anywhere. When a black man speaks of Marx, the first reaction is the following quote, we educated you, and now you are turning against your benefactors, ungrateful wretches. You'll always be a disappointment, end quote. And there's that sledgehammer argument from the plantation owners in Africa. Our enemy is the elementary school lead teacher. The fact is that the European has a set idea of the black man. And there is nothing more exacerbating than to hear, quote, how long have you lived in France? You speak such good French, end quote. It could be argued that this is due to the fact that a lot of black people speak pidgin. But that would be too easy. You're traveling by train and ask, excuse me, could you please tell me where the restaurant car is? Yes, sonny boy. You go corridor, you go straight, go one car, go two car, go three car, you there. Let's be serious. Speaking pidgin means imprisoning the black man and perpetuating a conflictual situation where the white man infects the black man with extremely toxic foreign bodies. There is nothing more sensational than a black man speaking correctly, for he is appropriating the white world. I often have conversations with foreign students. They speak French badly. Little Robinson Crusoe, alias Prospero in his element. He explains, informs, comments, and helps them with their studies. But with the black man, he is utterly stupefied. The black man, he has put himself on an equal footing. The game is no longer possible. He is a pure replica of the white man who has surrendered to the facts. After everything has just been said, it is easy to understand why the first reaction of the black man is to say no to those who endeavor to define him. It is understandable that the black man's first action is a reaction, and since he is assessed with regard to his degree of assimilation, it is understandable too why the returning Antillean speaks only French, because he is striving to underscore the rift that has occurred. He embodies a new type of man who he imposes on his colleagues and family. His old mother no longer understands when he speaks of her PJs, her ramshackle dump, and her lousy joint, all that embellished with the appropriate accent. In every country in the world, there are social climbers, those who think that they've arrived. And opposite them, there are those who keep the notion of their origins. The Antillean returning from the metropole speaks in Creole if he wants to signify that nothing has changed. It can be sensed on the docks where the friends and relatives are waiting for him not only in the literal sense, but in the sense of waiting to catch him out. They need only 1 minute to make their diagnosis. If he says, quote, "I'm so happy to be back among you. Good Lord, it's so hot in this place. I'm not sure I can put up with it for long," end quote. They've been forewarned. It is a European who's come back. In a different respect, when a group of Antillean students meet in Paris, they have two options. Either support the white world, i.e., the real world, and with the help of French, he be able to address certain issues and aim at a certain degree of universalism in their conclusions, or reject Europe. Yo, a generic term for other people, especially European. How interesting. Or reject Europe. Yo, and come together thanks to Creole by settling comfortably in what we'll call the Martinicians' Umwelt. Umwelt, German. God, there's a place in Brisbane. The world as it is experienced by a particular organism. Around surrounding Welt, environment or surroundings. Lexical in the 20th century, the term denotes a unique species-specific perceptual world that an organism experiences. It distinguishes an organism's subjective reality from its objective surroundings. By this we mean, and this goes especially for our Antillean brothers, that when one of our comrades in Paris or another university town attempts to address a problem in all seriousness, he is accused of putting on airs. And the best way of disarming him is to brandish the Antilles and shift into Creole. This is one of the reasons why so many friendships fall through after a few months of life in Europe. Since our argument is the disalienation of blacks, we would like them to realize that every time there's a breakdown in understanding among themselves faced with the white world, there is a lack of judgment. A Senegalese who learned Creole to pass for an Antillean is a case of alienation. The Antillians who make a mockery out of him are lacking in judgment. As we have seen, we are not mistaken in thinking that a study of the Antillean's language can reveal several characteristics of his world. As we said at the beginning, there are mutual supports between language and the community. To speak a language is to appropriate its world and culture. The Antillean who wants to be white will succeed, since he will have adopted the cultural language of language. Sorry, adopted the cultural tool of language. I can remember just over a year ago in Lyon, following a lecture where I have drawn a parallel between Black and European poetry, a French comrade telling me enthusiastically, basically, you're a white man. The fact I had studied such an interesting question in the white man's language gave me my credentials. It should be understood that historically, the black man who wants to speak French, since it is the key to open doors with only 50 years ago, still remained close to him. The Antillean who falls without description goes out of his way to seek subtleties and rarities of the language, a way of proving to himself that he is culturally adequate. It has been said that the Antillean orator has the power of expression which leaves the European grasping. In 1945, during an electoral campaign, Emile Césaire, who was running for parliament, was speaking at a boys' school in Fort-de-France in front of a packed auditorium. It is in the middle of his talk, a woman fainted. The next day, a colleague describing the event commented, quote, his French was so dynamite the woman fell to the floor and started catching Marcadi, the power of language, fall into convulsions. Imagine that. A few other facts deserve closer attention. For instance, M. Charles Andre Julian introducing Aimé Césaire as a black poet with a university agrégation, or quite simply the expression, quote, a great black poet. These ready made phrases that seem to be common sense, after all, Aimé Césaire is black and a poet, contain a hidden nuance, a persistence crux. I know nothing about Jean Paulhan, perhaps except that he writes interesting books. I have no idea how old Roger Calois is. The only evidence I have of him is when his presence streaks across the sky from time to time. And let no one accuse me of affective anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis comes from Greek, up, ana, back up again, and phylaxis, protection, guarding, coined 1920. Against protection, reverse protection, meaning back up again. Against protection. Effective anaphylaxis. Sounds like what I need. Affective anaphylaxis refers to the severe psychological distress, including acute anxiety, panic, and potential post traumatic stress disorder that results from experiencing life threatening allergic reaction. It is often characterized by a profound feeling of doom during events and lasting chronic anxiety and future reactions. Wow, sounds unrelatable. And let no one accuse me of affective anaphylaxis. What I mean to say is that there is no reason why Monsieur Breton should say of Césaire, quote, here is a black man who handles the French language unlike any white man today, end quote. And even if Monsieur Breton were telling the truth, I don't see where the paradox lies. Hmm. Let us return to Michael Lary's. If in the Antillean writer there is a desire to break with the literary forms associated with official education, such a desire striving toward a freer future would not assume the appearance of folklore, seeking above all in literature to formulate a message that is their very own, and in the case of some of them, at least to be the spokesman of a real race with unrecognized potential, They scorn the artifice which for them, whose intellectual education has been almost exclusively French, would represent recourse to a language they could only use as a second language they have learned. But blacks will retort, we should be honored that a white man such as Breton writes such things about us. Let's move on. Until next time for chapter 2, The Woman of Color and the White Man.